Coming up on Oakdale Update, local author Gloria Van Demmeltraadt joins me in the studio. Plus, we'll share some fun events taking place in the city. Stay tuned. Oakdale Update is straight ahead. Hello and welcome to Oakdale Update. I'm your host, Frank Orsello. This is the City of Oakdale's news and information program about your community. I'm now joined by local author Gloria Van Demmeltraadt. Gloria, thank you for joining us on Oakdale Update.
Oh, thank you for inviting me, Frank. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, you and I go back a lot of years, don't we, Gloria?
We do. And do you know the first thing I have to say is thank you for saying my name correctly?
Oh, really?
You can imagine what I go through with
I'm
the last
sure,
name
I'm sure.
of Van Demmeltraadt.
And I've seen many on your books here. You have Gloria Van. I mean, it saves
I'll
a lot
tell you
of...
about that, how that came
Okay,
about.
we'll get into that. But that's, I'm sure that's why. It's Ed Van Demmeltraadt. That's a long name. Okay, so you've led a, tell us about yourself first. Let's talk about that.
Well, I am an active grandma right now. I've been retired for a number of years. And I used to write marketing materials for an engineering firm, and that's how I got involved in writing.
Okay.
But I was a singer for many, many years, a really good one actually.
Yeah.
And what happened is I lost my hearing. And when one of those senses goes, others take over and we do different things. And I thought, well, what am I going to do now? I really
Sure.
don't sing alone anymore. And my daughter and I were talking and she said, you know, Mom, you're a pretty good writer. How about doing some writing? And I'd like to hear the farm stories. We used to live on a hobby farm with the children growing up. And there were lots of fun, exciting things to talk about there. So that's how I started.
Okay. And now you've led a very interesting life as, okay, you're an author of 6 books.
Yes.
And you write numerous articles.
Yes.
And that is your background, you're saying that. The farm story, that was the first thing. So what did you do? Just write a diary, start with a diary on that farm business? Or
well,
what?
I call it a memoir. A memoir. There's a difference between a memoir and a biography or autobiography. A memoir is a moment in time. And I took that, I told about my whole life in the story, basically, but really concentrated on that period of time when we lived on the hobby farm and after that. And that moment in time just grew. It grew. And I had such a great time writing it that I decided this is really fun. I'm going to keep on with it.
So that was more of a memoir. So that
Yes.
and you got it published then, did you
Yes,
not?
yes, I did.
As a story about being on the farm, that kind of
Yes, it's a story of my life, and I've had many ups and many downs. And
okay, and now one of the things you do is you write life stories.
I do.
And you said, I think you said 150 life stories?
Yes,
tell us
I've
about
written
that.
about
What
that
is a life
many.
story, and tell us about that.
I am a hospice volunteer, and I got into that about just after I had published my first book. And after that, I wrote a history of the village of Lake Elmo. And while I was doing that work, I got involved in hospice. My former husband had been on hospice care and passed away. And the man I eventually married, named Van Demmeltraadt, his wife was also on hospice care and had passed away. So we met after they had both died and married, and we decided we owed something to hospice. And so we both became volunteers. And because I was a writer, they were just beginning a program of writing life stories for patients. And was I interested in that? And I thought, wow, that sounds really fun to do.
Absolutely.
So I started doing that about 10 years ago. It's been about 10 years ago. And it's now one of the major things I do in my life.
You're still doing it. You're
Oh,
still doing
absolutely. I picked up a final draft of one yesterday. I have to get that finished and give it to the patient and finish it up and
So do
make
these,
it
are
into a
these
book.
being published, these memoirs?
No. These are for families. These are for families. They are, I go to the patient, I interview them and record them, and then I take that material home and write it into a story. I play the interview
really?
back and then write it into a story of their life. And I do about 3 or 4 interviews usually. And it turns out to be maybe 15 to 20, 25 pages long. Put it in like a 3-ring binder, and I put some pictures in them, and
is this at your expense, or how do you?
it's at my expense. I do this as a volunteer.
You do?
I do this as a volunteer. I do some for hire as well for other people. I've done quite a few for others as well. But the hospice stories are really my passion. They are. It's so important to capture those lives for their families.
Absolutely. I was asked to do one, a World War II veteran, and I did him on the show here. It was we did an hour, but it was for the family.
Oh,
and I don't think they broadcast it, but it did go to the family.
Yeah.
They approached me and asked me to do it, and it was just wonderful. I mean, that man and his family. Every time I see the son, he thanks me to this day.
Oh, absolutely.
Very important, especially these World War II people that
these
are.
families appreciate it so much, and I've had many World War II veterans and Korean War veterans.
Yes. Does that get into publishing? Because that's kind of should be an open book. I mean,
Well, those stories are confidential because they are hospice patients, and all that work is confidential. So it is not published, and I don't really show people those stories. Or
it would have to be up to the family if they wanted it published or
exactly.
made public.
And some do. Some will, depending on how long the story is, will copy it and hand it out at their funeral.
Oh, wonderful. Now, when you this Memories of Lake Elmo.
Yes.
Now that's a different story. There, you're interviewing. Who did you interview for this book?
Oh wow, I interviewed. I think there were 220 people.
Oh wow.
People who live in the town, mostly elderly people who remember the long ago stories, and I did a tremendous amount of research for that book. That took about 18 months of hard work. I would say I worked like 6 to 8 hours a day for 18 months on that book. So it was a lot of work, but what a wonderful thing it was. It has become more popular now than, I wrote it in 2013.
Really?
And it's more popular now than it was then because things have changed. We have new developments. Many things have changed in Lake Elmo.
So there's a lot of new people moving in there. So they're the ones that appreciate this?
Absolutely, they do. I give the history of each of the buildings in downtown on both sides of the street, the history of the bank, the Lake Elmo Bank, the Lake Elmo Inn. So there's a chapter called Eating or Dining or something, and I give the histories of the Lake Elmo Inn, Gorman's Restaurant, which started as the White Hat.
Yes.
And the bar, the Twin Point Bar.
Yes.
When that started.
And the school's been there forever
Oh
too,
yes,
hasn't
yes.
it?
There's quite a bit on the school as well.
Yes, which I hear that they're going to tear it down or remodel it and add to it or something.
Yes.
But the population is just growing
Yes.
hugely in Lake Elmo, isn't it? Yeah.
And it's so fun for the residents of the town to know the history.
Yeah.
And I connected with some influential people there, Bruce Boydell from the bank, Bud Schneider, who was a lifelong resident of Lake Elmo, knew everybody.
Yes.
And had worked in every little establishment in the town throughout his life, and he was just a joy to interview.
And it seems to me that the people in Lake Elmo are from Lake Elmo and they stay in Lake Elmo, right? Especially the older ones.
Many of the families, yes, 5 generations in the town.
Easy. And now, did you get to the farmers that in the immediate area there? Because there again, those people have been there for generations, haven't they?
Absolutely, absolutely. It was, farming is that's how it started in 1852, when 3 Lohmann brothers from Germany came looking for land, and they found this wonderful land in Lake Elmo and decided to start their town. It was called Lohmannville in the beginning, and then it became Lake Elmo later.
And that's a whole story how it became Lake Elmo too, with the lake and how the lake became Lake Elmo and all that.
That's a whole story
That's
by
another
itself.
story, yeah. Because I was president of the historical Oakdale Lake Elmo Historical Society, and that was part of the thing. And we did a history of that. I'm sure you've read that.
Absolutely.
And there was a good story in there about Lake Elmo that was brought into it, and how we were East Oakdale and turned into all Oakdale, and Lake Elmo became separate. And
I worked with the Historical Society at the beginning of working on the book and got tremendous amount of information.
The Washington County or the Oakdale? Oakdale Lake Elmo?
Oakdale Lake Elmo.
Oh yeah, that's right,
yes,
that's right.
Yes.
Okay, so now, then you branched off into mystery books, is that correct?
Yes.
Well, you did this one, and then you went into the mystery books, is that correct?
No, well, then I wrote Darkness in Paradise.
Oh, that's right.
Darkness in Paradise is the story of my husband, Orsello Van Demmeltraadt, who was born in what was then the Dutch East Indies, and it became Indonesia after World War II. He was a child during the war, and we got to talking, and actually, my husband knows you, Frank, and I think you kind of inspired him or maybe pushed him a little bit.
I pushed him hard.
His stories are wonderful. He has an amazing memory. And
let me just sidetrack on that.
Yeah.
I'm kind of a World War II buff. And he was a child during World War II, but he was in a concentration camp back in Indonesia. And every time he'd come in, I'm a barber, and every time he'd come in, I'd ask him about this and all that, and I kept saying, Ano, do you have this written down? And he said, no. How about your kids? Do they know? No. And then I met you, or we knew each other before that. But then I pushed you, and you pushed him, and we got that book written. And I say we got this book written. Go ahead.
Good for you.
We got this book written. Go ahead.
We pushed him enough, and I did it the way I do my hospice stories. We sat out on our patio, and actually we were sitting in the house, and he was telling me a story, and I said, oh no, this is fascinating. Does your family know this? Do your children? No, they're not interested, he said.
Yep.
Well, I am. And so I got my recorder, we went outside, sat on the patio, and he started telling a story. I recorded it, went in and transcribed it, and pretty soon we had a summer long of wonderful, wonderful stories, and I started putting it together into a book.
Okay, now that's the person, I read the book, of course, because he's my friend, and I read the book, and there's more to it than just interviewing him. I mean, you talked about the government, what was happening in Indonesia at the time, and what happened before the war, during the war, and after the war, and then more into his life after that.
I did a lot of research.
So how do you go about doing that kind of research?
Well, I do a lot of research online. I look for other books and read them to learn about the country and about the people. And I made some wonderful contacts online. Yes, I met a man from Seattle, Washington, who has done a tremendous amount of collecting materials for World War II. And through him, I got the original copy.
What was his tie to the war? He was.
His father had been in the war.
Oh, okay.
And he wanted to collect that information, and I haven't contacted him lately, so I don't know if he's still doing it or how he's doing now. But anyway, he gave me the original copy of the, it was called the Kill All document. It started
Does
the
he
end
have a
of the
copy
war.
of your book? Did you send him a copy?
Yes, it's in the book. It's in the book.
No, did you send him a copy of?
Yes,
You did. Okay.
Oh,
so.
yes. And also, when we were talking about my husband's father, who was a prisoner of war in Sumatra. But the family never knew where he had been incarcerated. He never talked about it much after the war. And we discovered through this man in Seattle, we were talking one day, and he said do you have a copy of Fritz Van Demmeltraadt's index card? And I said, index card? I don't know of such a thing. And I talked to Anno, and he didn't know of such a thing. And he sent it to me, and it showed where his father had been in throughout the war, in which prison camps.
Oh, wow.
He was in one of the camps in Sumatra where Louis Zamperini, the man who wrote the book Unbroken,
Right.
and he was in one of those same terrible camps, and it was totally different experiences, but it was fascinating. So I came into contact with people like that all over the world, and trying, because when you're writing about those things, you have to have the right background, doing the right research to find out that you've got the correct information.
Oh my goodness.
And I had newspaper pictures in the book, and you have to get permission. Well, all these newspapers were blown up. They're gone.
Sure.
They never were running again after the war.
Sure.
So it was determined that I could use that information.
You know, it seems to me, so you all this researching you were doing, how many other tracks could you have gone off on?
Oh.
Stories, and you know,
Absolutely.
the man you were talking about before, you know, his background.
Yes.
That'd be a whole nother book, wouldn't it?
Absolutely, it would. It is fascinating when you write about real things. That's why biography or autobiography and memoir is so important to me, that people capture their memories. And that is the easiest type of writing to do. You know all the characters,
Sure.
You're intimately acquainted with
Sure.
them, you know exactly what happened and where and when. Fiction is a whole new ball game. And I joined a writers group, the writers group called WOW, Women of Words, which is wonderful. And we meet monthly and share information, and it's just fabulous. And I learned so much from them. And I was inspired by some friends who write fiction. And actually, they are both romance writers. Well, that wasn't a genre that really interested me, but I love mystery. We write what we know. Sure. And I read mysteries.
Sure.
I'm just a voracious reader. I probably read at least two books a week, and always have. And I love mystery and history as well. So they said, why don't you try fiction? You know, you're good at writing nonfiction, try it. I loved it.
Okay.
I started it, and I had to make up a town. It's a lot more work. I had to make up an area, all the characters, and of course what happens to those characters, and there's got to be a murder here, and something else that happens in a mystery.
Sure.
And so you become intimately acquainted with all those characters. The more you know your characters in fiction, the better the book is, because the characters begin to move the story.
Sure.
And I have to tell you what happened then. My first book was Danger in Deep Lake. And I made up all these great characters, and I'm writing away, and Ona was in the living room, and I'm in the office, and I'm typing away and writing this story. And all of a sudden, I was so in the zone, and my characters were moving the plot to a situation that I hadn't planned on.
Oh, wow.
I hadn't thought about it, but because of a discussion between these two characters, whom I knew so well because I had designed them, and that's how important it is to know your characters.
Sure.
They moved the story to a whole new adventure that I hadn't even planned on.
Oh, wow. So it just took its own path then,
It does. It will take its own path. But the writer has to know their characters very intimately. You have to know. And what I do is I write not just an index card, but I keep it on the computer. I make up a file of each character and everything about them. She's got a scar on her knee from childhood. She had a pimple in 9th grade in Latin class, and those kind of things. You know them so well. And when you're writing the story then, many times you have to go back and look. okay, does that character have brown eyes or blue eyes?
Oh, wow.
So while I'm writing my chapter, I've got my character file open behind it so I can go check, oh, does he have blue eyes or brown eyes? Those are things that readers notice.
Absolutely. And that's what I was going to ask you too about. So if you write something that's comes out to be inaccurate, do you have a editor that proofreads your books, your stories?
Oh, yeah, that's several subjects, but editing is extremely important. Every good writer knows you cannot edit your own work.
Absolutely.
You cannot
Absolutely.
edit
I'm
your
sure of
own
that,
work.
yeah.
You've got to hire good editing. That makes or breaks
So
a
you
book.
do have an editor then?
Oh, yes, yes.
The same one you doing all your books, or?
No, I've had different editors for mine. It depends on what the subject of the book is and what their expertise is. So if I want, for editing my fiction books, I want somebody that writes or knows fiction. And so it does behoove us to look for people that are trained in that field.
Absolutely. Hey,
in that
speaking of
genre.
that, now you do writing classes. You teach in writing classes.
Well, I teach a class called Capturing Your Story, and I've written that into a little book. But I've done it through community ed several times. I go to group meetings. I've done it for senior citizen places where they live, co-ops and that sort of thing. And helping them capture their story, because as you've certainly noticed, it's my passion to have us capture our memories for our families. If it gets published, that's great later on, but that's not the focus.
Sure.
The focus is capturing our memories for our family.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that I stress is capturing memories from long ago, from childhood with your parents and your grandparents, because your grandchildren don't know your grandparents.
Yep, yep.
And your interaction, your relationships are completely different.
You know, this, I mean, I think in every person that's ever had a history of grandparents and that kind of thing probably are so angry at themselves for not sitting down and talking to grandma and grandpa.
Oh.
In my case, both sides came from Italy, and I can remember them. They were old. I mean, they were old when they weren't old, but you know, in those days. And I just think that they could speak Italian, and I couldn't. I could understand them, but I couldn't speak it. But so many stories I could have asked them and talked to them about.
Yes.
And about 10 years ago, I went back to Italy. I did go to the village, and so I saw where they came from.
Oh.
And that was so wonderful. But I didn't talk to them when they were alive, you know.
I know.
And I just rue the day I didn't do it. And I'm sure half our audience could say the same thing, if not
Absolutely.
90%.
When I start my class there, I said, the saddest thing I hear is, I wish I had asked my mother that.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's too
Exactly.
late now. So what I want is for us to capture our memories so that our children don't have to say that.
Yes.
They don't say that.
My son asked me about when you were a kid, Dad. To me, it's just, it's mundane and it's not important and all that, but it is.
It is.
And it will be 20 years down the road if he writes this down and I write it, or I write it down. It is so important, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely
But
correct.
everybody's so busy, nobody does it, do they?
No.
Do you encourage that?
A few do. I just did a session, a capture a memory session at a co-op in, where was it? In the Twin City area. And there really was a lot of interest there, and I think these people are going to keep it up. And what I suggest is that people get together with a mentor or someone else and talk about it.
Yes.
It's very difficult. Our children will give us a recorder and they'll say, tell me stories about something or other. Well, we won't do it.
No.
You don't do it while you're sitting there alone. You want to tell somebody that story.
Yes.
It isn't just the writing, because that stops a lot of people.
Yes.
They'll start it and say, what should I call it? What should I name it? Well, that stops it immediately.
Yep.
You don't think about those things. And even typing or writing it is a hindrance to a lot of people.
Sure.
But you are familiar, you're used to taping, record it somehow capture it.
Yes.
but be careful what you use. That written word lasts forever. That little those little notebooks that I do for the hospice patients are on their bookshelves. Those grandkids see them in 20 years and they know where they came from.
And I have thought always to myself, every day I come home from work with, I got 10 stories in my head from people who I met, and I never wrote it down. If I just put a little note, and then when I get old and retired, I could write a book. I'll use your book for writing a book. But we're running out of time, Gloria. I mean, this has been so fabulous. But one other thing is, what do you have on the back burner right now? You got something going right now?
Well, I'm writing my third mystery right now. I made up a town. Deep Lake, Minnesota is a town in the eastern suburbs of St. Paul, in this Oakdale, Lake Elmo, Stillwater area. And I made up that town and the characters, and it turned out to be so much fun, and I've gotten into those characters. So, and this first book won 2 nice awards, and people have been talking about it and say, when's the next one coming?
Really, good deal.
So I thought, gee, maybe I should do that. So then I did write, the next one is Death in Deep Lake. And now the third one is coming out. It's not named yet. It might be Trouble in Deep Lake. But it's another Deep Lake series, and it's got its characters that will follow, and readers have given me suggestions. Oh, why don't you have Otis go do this, or Mackenzie can go do something here.
So people contact you and
oh
and
yes,
make suggestions?
yes, I hear from readers all the time.
Okay, I just got one. We just run out of time here, but one quick question: that when you write something and it turns out to be not accurate, do you hear from people?
Oh, wow. That's where research comes in, Frank. We have to research accurately, and I do a tremendous amount of it. For example, in my books, I talk about guns. I mean, there are a couple of characters that are shot by guns, and I have to know all about those
the
guns.
Caliber.
So, oh, man, I am researching things all the time, and if you do get something wrong, you'll hear about it.
Oh, I'm
so
sure.
You have to be really careful.
Sure. Okay, we're so out of time. But I just, the time that you put in on writing a book, I mean, if you were being paid for the time you're in, you'd probably be making a nickel an hour or so.
Right, maybe.
And the thing is, a person has to have the time to do this, correct?
Yes,
I mean, you can't, I don't think you'd be working a 40-hour-a-week job and still writing.
Many of my friends do. Do you know, time is the one thing that we don't have extra of. Time is there. We do what we want to with our time. When people will say, oh, I'm doing such and such, and somebody will say, oh, I'd love to do that, but I don't have time to do it. Yeah. That's not it at all.
Yes.
They don't want to.
Yes.
We spend our time the way we want to.
It's the excuse not to do it.
Exactly. And I know writers who are write at night and work during the day. If it's a passion, it will happen.
Sure.
It will happen. We do with our time what we really want to do.
Absolutely.
And right now, I'm loving this, and
well,
writing
the good thing is you are retired, so you do have the time.
Yes.
Gloria, we are so out of time, it's just a fright. But it was so wonderful interviewing you.
Thank you.
And I'm going to go home and start writing my memoirs.
Good. Oh,
how's that?
That's wonderful.
Okay. You've talked me into it.
Oh.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Frank. This has been delightful.
Okay. That's all we have time for on this month's Oakdale Update. We leave you with a list of city events and reminders. For everyone at the City of Oakdale, thanks for watching.